bit more context and analysis on this subject. So let's go ahead and welcome in Elizabeth Wydra. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Elizabeth, you are the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. We know that you have been following these public hearings for nearly 18 months. So now that we have wrapped up the final hearing, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think the committee has really just done an amazing job of laying out the case of what happened on January 6th, what led up to January 6th, and what really we need to do now in order to hold those responsible accountable. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful about yesterday is they made a really succinct closing statement with video, with clips from testimony from former President Trump's inner circle. And they really laid the foundation for what we got to is sort of the climax of that meeting yesterday, which was which were the 4 criminal referrals for former President Donald Trump and some of his allies. And I think that, they really laid the foundation for that by having all of these public hearings where they had really powerful testimony and presented to the American people the facts behind these criminal referrals. And so at this point, there wasn't really any other choice, I don't think, but to follow the facts and the law where they led, which were to these criminal referrals. And then we'll see in the full report that will be out tomorrow, even more detail of why they felt this was necessary. And then also, I think importantly, not just these criminal referrals and the referral to the House Ethics Committee for certain members of Congress, but also we expect in the report to see some policy recommendations to try to ensure not just accountability for what happened on January 6th, but to try to prevent this from ever happening again.
So when you talk about holding those who are involved accountable and the full process of the investigation, we cannot fail to mention that this committee actually reviewed, I think, more than 1 million documents, conducted more than 1,000 interviews during their investigation, and ultimately recommending that the Justice Department file criminal charges against former President Donald Trump. My question is, can we actually expect the DOJ to take up the committee's charges?
So you raise a really great point. This was an absolutely thorough, professional, bipartisan investigation, which, as you mentioned, more than 1,000 interviews, an enormous amount of documents reviewed. And there were professional national security officials, folks who really took this seriously. And this was a bipartisan, focused effort on finding out the facts. And so given all of that, I think in some ways it will be hard for the Justice Department not to follow through on some of these criminal referrals, because the amount of evidence that has been amassed by the Select Committee and that will be handed over to the Department of Justice is so voluminous and so clear that I think it will be difficult for the Justice Department, if they want to continue to hold true to the maxim in the United States that no one is above the law. It will be hard for them not to follow through on some of these charges. And also, these proceedings were public. The public has seen the compelling case made by the Select Committee. The public has seen these videos, that you're showing again. And if the Justice Department does not follow through on that, I think it will send a very bad signal about accountability in this country. We've already seen some of the kind of, as Congressman Raskin put it, the foot soldiers of January 6th be convicted, get jail time. And so if the people at the top don't, then that says a lot about whether people with power will be held accountable or just those who are, everyday folks.
So let's talk about the specifics of these charges, because the committee is accusing Trump of violating laws governing obstruction of Congress, inciting an insurrection, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and conspiracy to make false statements. I mean, obviously, these are very, very important accusations, but why? What's the significance behind these specific charges?
These are extremely serious charges, and they get to the root of what happened on January 6th. So you see, the ultimate charge of aiding, abetting, giving comfort to, inciting insurrection, the actual violent insurrection that happened on January 6th. obstructing an official proceeding. That's the temporarily successful stopping of counting the electoral votes, this crucial constitutional step in our peaceful transfer of power that happens in American democracy and has happened, other than January 6th, smoothly and per the Constitution. And so that is a grave charge to be leveled at someone who had the responsibility of leading this country, of following the Constitution. He pledged an oath, sworn oath, to uphold the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, and instead, as the charges say from the Select Committee, instead chose to obstruct that constitutional order and try to disrupt the will of the people as expressed in their vote in that election, which was to have Joe Biden be the next president of the United States. And, I think that it's appropriate that they made those charges given the facts that they'd laid out. They really didn't have any other choice once they had that evidence, once they presented it to the public. Those charges are what the evidence supports.
And former President Donald Trump is not the only one facing some of these accusations. The House Ethics Committee is actually looking to investigate 4 other Republican lawmakers, including possibly the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
Yes. So there were subpoenas issued to get testimony from some of these key congressional figures, including potential Speaker McCarthy. And they refused to cooperate, even though there were legitimate subpoenas issued to them. And so that's serious. And if a person who wasn't a member of Congress did that, they could be held in criminal contempt in court. And this is really the House's own way of trying to enforce against its own members. Now, of course, the Congress will change over in the new year to the House will change to a Republican majority. So, I think that, hopes perhaps are low for the House Ethics Committee to follow through, but they really should, because no matter who's in power, the proper and appropriate subpoenas should be respected. But, I think this leads to something that is going to be important now when we see things shift over to the Department of Justice. There were certain limitations on the House Select Committee getting testimony, including from these key congressional figures. And the Department of Justice has more tools at its disposal to get that testimony. So as much evidence that the Select Committee amassed, there could be, and likely will be, even more evidence available to the Department of Justice.
So what's next? We do expect that final report to be released today, of course, probably placing former President Donald Trump really at the center of the conspiracy to overturn the 2020 presidential elections. But what else can we expect to be in the final report, which is going to be released on Wednesday?
Yes, so obviously the facts behind these criminal referrals for Donald Trump and others will be a very key part of this report. But again, I want to focus on not just what happened on January 6th, but the continuing threats to democracy. Obviously, from folks who were involved in January 6th, they continue to be, like former President Donald Trump, involved in politics. But also we want to make sure, and I think the committee wants to make sure, that we are not in this vulnerable position again. So we expect to see some recommendations that could be taken up by Congress, by the presidential administration, to try to put in guardrails for our democracy to ensure that we are not in this position again. And those are going to be important recommendations, because we saw from the story told through the committee proceedings that because of the bravery and courage of a number of individuals to stand up and say, we will not be part of this effort to subvert the will of the American people, that we were saved, our democracy was saved on January 6th. But we don't want to just rely on certain people doing the right thing and having the courage to do the right thing. We want to try to put into place policies, laws, structures to ensure that our democracy is stronger.
Elizabeth, any final thoughts?
Yes, I think this is, we've become, I think, used to a lot of the extraordinary behavior from former President Trump, whether you're a fan or a critic. But what happened before the Select Committee and what happened obviously on January 6th was an extraordinary, terrible event. And what the committee is reporting out, these criminal referrals for the first time against a former president of the United States, is deeply serious for our American democracy. And I think it's important for all Americans to urge accountability for this moment and to try to prevent this threat to our democracy from ever recurring.
All right, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.